All right, guys, welcome to another. I was going to say Sunday night. Welcome to another live session of the Watercraft Journal. I'm your host, Kevin Shaw. I'm the editor in chief of the Watercraft Journal. Thanks for tuning in tonight. We are doing something a little bit easier tonight. We do not have a guest. We do not have any surprises. We're just going to take some questions if you got super chats. But I was going to share a couple little stories, and then if you had questions, I'm happy to answer those questions. But for now, let's just kind of catch up on some news really quickly. And that is that this week we had some pretty big stuff coming up and already go live this week. I don't know if you saw already, but we did the article on the Fuel Tech Yamaha oil pan. And for those guys who did not watch last Monday's podcast with Fuel Tech CEO Anderson Dick and Greenholt Garage's Greg Gaddis, you absolutely and completely and totally missed out. It was genuinely one of the best ones that I was able to enjoy. And that one was just a whole stinking lot of fun. One of the most educational for guys who are getting their feet wet and starting to learn the technical side of performance jet skis. Anderson was a phenomenal guest, and I'm pretty sure we're going to be having him again as there's more stuff coming out from Fuel Tech. The big thing, of course, was today's article. And what was kind of revelatory last week was that they had made a short run of CNC cut billet aluminum oil pans that also had four-way trap doors. And those trap doors operate a lot of you guys who don't build engines or aren't involved in that kind of stuff. Inside of an oil pan, performance oil pans will actually have swinging doors that will swing one way but not another way. And the reason they exist is to maximize keeping oil in what's called the cage. The cage is where the oil pickup is, and that it would be like effectively a big metal straw that sucks oil up and lubricates the engine. It's pumped throughout the engine, all right? And it's a major artery. Well, that cage has to remain full. If oil escapes that cage, it's sucking air, and you're pumping air through, and it's effectively an embolism. All right. And that was very interesting because he was looking at it as hey, listen, there is only 5 quarts of capacity in the 1.8 liter and 1.9 liter Yamahas. I want to double that. And so he quite literally doubled the oil capacity. It holds 10 quarts of oil. Well, why do you want so much oil in that engine? Yeah. All right. For a lot of people who just don't understand, and that's okay. It's educational. The more oil you have in circulation, the less likely it's going to get contaminated, less likely it's going to get burned, or it's going to raise into it's going to be overheated. And so if you've got, instead of 5 quarts, you got 10 quarts, and that's in constant circulation, you're actually in really good shape. All right. And because you're going to have more engine longevity, more engine life. Plus, he has that cage constantly filled with oil. You're never going to run dry. Well, I don't know if you guys, for those who were watching, Jerry Gaddis actually came in and he mentioned to Greg, myself, and Anderson, he says, man, we're having a lot of problems with the SVHO engines with the supercharger shaft and that they would burn up. And he says, well, listen, it's burning up because the oil pan is a terrible design from Yamaha, and it's not allowing oil in that cage, and it's pumping dry, especially for a high performance guy. He might have a couple seconds of a dry supercharger shaft spinning at 8,000, 9,000 RPM. It's effectively welding itself into the supercharger or into the housing. And we all stared at each other and went, holy crap, your oil pan's going to fix that. And he goes, yeah, it would fix that. It would fix that because it's always going to have a full positively filled cage in the oil pan. And we're like, that's the greatest thing you could possibly do. So Greg Gaddis and I both had both of our articles went live today talking about the oil pan. He's like, holy crap, we have to do this. And I've already had two different viewers of the podcast say I've already ordered the pan. Don't get me wrong, it ain't cheap. It's over $1,600. All right. Most of you guys who aren't true racers or performance enthusiasts or really, really pushing your Yamahas to the bleeding edge, you might not need that. Especially a $1,600, $1,700 oil pan that requires you to pull the whole engine out to swap the pan and put that in and put it back in your ski. But for the guy who's like, I want maximum longevity, I want to be able to there's a forward drain plug that now allows you to drain the oil, drain the oil without having to do the siphon, but actually in a true drain kit. It's bitching. It's really great. So I think it's one of the greatest innovations for Yamaha, and for you guys who are considering it, that might be something to save up for because it is a chunk of cash. So there is that, and that was the big news that went out today. Billy Duplessis is here, everyone. Give cheers to Billy. Billy is here. All right. Great news. I see some questions coming in. If you guys want me to answer those, definitely hit up the super chat because I'm going to skip over most of them. All right. Well, two more things to talk about. I have the Balassi Buraska video ready to go. It's in fact right here on my desktop, and I can show you here. Let me drag it over to my laptop that I have over here. Here, you can see I have it ready to fly. There it is. That video is ready to be uploaded and go. But we have a really big announcement coming from Riva Racing this week, I believe on the 1st. And that's going to take precedence over this video. And that bumps some of the publishing schedule back. So if this video goes live, it'll go live on Thursday. Otherwise, it'll go up next week. We are still working on the shootout between the Ultra 160 LXS and the GTX 170. That one will still take a couple weeks to work on. But expect that one to come out in probably 2 to 3 weeks. And we're going to get on a more regular schedule of episode videos every other week. I think the last 5 weeks, we've done one every week. And that's really costly because I'm not editing them. I have two guys who edit video for me, and I can't double fist it anymore. That's a lot of work going around. So, all right. Upcoming video, upcoming articles. All right, well, let's talk about November 1st. November 1st marks exactly 10 years to the day that the Watercraft Journal was launched. And it's a little bit of it's a little weird because I technically look at January 1st of 2013 as our start date. But we did it under the name of Watercraft Performance. Do I still have? I think I kept. Yeah, I kept a handful of the stickers. I did. I kept a handful of these stickers of Watercraft Performance. These were our original stickers. In fact, if you go to watercraftperformance.com, watercraftperformance.com still takes you to the Watercraft Journal. And I should put these in a bag instead of using this stupid clip on it. It's imprinting on them. But we launched Watercraft Performance on January 1st of 2013. And we had an angel sponsor. They were kind of basically paying my bills and keeping the website up. And I had brought in a couple guys who I worked with at Personal Watercraft Illustrated. For you graybeards, you'll remember Personal Watercraft Illustrated. It was the longest running print magazine. That magazine had launched in 2000. Wow. In 1988. I took over the magazine in early 07 as editor. And unfortunately, the economy, the Obama economy just crushed sales, watercraft sales. Everyone was pulling their ads. It was really bad news. And print magazines is just a losing way of it's not a way to make a fortune. It's not a way to make money. I think at the time, I think in 2010, I was making, I think $63,000. So they were paying my salary. We had a publisher. We had a senior editor who was getting a check. We had an associate editor, a guy named Justin Standard, who was a great kid, really great kid. We had a copy editor, we had an art director, and we had 2 sales guys. And all of them were pulling a salary. And the magazine at the time, I think, had 19,500 subs. And a subscription was what, $10? We were bleeding money. We were bleeding money at the time. And so my first kid was born the December 8th. And I went back to work the next week. My wife was home, and I went back to work the next week. And we weren't getting a publishing date. We weren't getting our usual cycle of deadlines. And I kept going to the publisher going, "Hey man, when's our date? When's our date?" And he kept pushing it back. And that's when I started getting nervous. And so finally I went in. I went into the publisher's office, and I'm like, "You got to tell me what the hell's going on." And he says, "You want to buy this magazine?" I said, "What?" He goes, "I'll sell it to you." And I said, "There's no way I'm buying this thing." Well, my dad was like, "Hey, I'll pony up the cash. You want to do it?" And I started doing the math. And I started looking at, what's it cost to print? What does it cost to mail? What does it cost to ship stuff? What's my salary? What's Justin's salary? What's my overhead? And I went back to the publisher and I said, "Dude, this thing is, how the hell did you keep this thing going? I think you're losing $100,000 a year." I'm like, "This thing's bleeding money." And he goes, "Yeah, it's not doing good." And I said, "I'm sorry, man. I got to pass this up." And so he gave me a couple days to clear out my office and clear out my stuff out of the garage, which was way more than what they gave other people. They marched a couple people out the door with like an hour's notice. And I still had a set of keys. He goes, "You come in with your truck, get everything out of the garage, And I was like, "Okay, cool." And they were really cool about it. And I walked out the door December 30th. Yeah, it was the day before New Year's. I locked up my office December 30th. And January 1st, 2010, I was out of a job. And they didn't even publish the last issue. The last issue was done. It was ready to go. And it was going to be bitching. It was going to be a bitching magazine. And it was long. It was a long print one because it had World Finals in it and had our annual year-long catalog or year-long review of all the new vehicles and blah blah blah. And people started calling me, going, "What the hell, dude? Where's PWI?" I'm like, "Dude, it's closed. I'm out of a job. My daughter's 3 weeks old. I got to find work." So I had a good friend of mine, I had a really good friend of mine named Jeff Faulkner. And Jeff and I, he was a hardcore fisherman, and I was obviously with jet skis. And we had a friend of ours named Mark Samuix, and Mark was the general manager. You heard my dog going in and out of the dog door because I have the door locked. Mark was doing jet ski fishing. He was a general manager for Huntington Beach Honda. And he owned the domain name jetangler.com. And over a couple of months, Jeff and I outfitted 2 skis with a bunch of fishing gear, and did some pictures and video and a bunch of stuff. And we were all geared up to launch jetangler.com. And Mark got cold feet. And he goes, "Oh, I don't know. And we had gone to the LA Boat Show. We had gone to the Fred Hall Fishing Show. We had gone to a couple other things. And huge response for jet ski fishing 2010. Huge response. And in fact, I have pictures of it. I have like 4 or 5 t-shirts too. Do I? I don't think I have anything for Jet Angler in here. No, I don't. I have it all on my Facebook profile. Anyway, and we were so ready to launch, and HydroTurf was going to get involved, and R&D Racing, Glenn Dickinson, and Circuit Jet Sports, and we had a handful of people who were like, "Hey, okay, how much jet ski fishing are you going to do versus regular jet ski?" And I was like, "I think it'll be like 50-50." And they go, "Okay, if you're going to keep the jet ski thing alive, we'll stay on." Well, Mark backed out, and we were ready to do a website. We were actually following Transworld Surf and Longboarder surfing websites, because the surfing magazines were starting to go digital. And so I was kind of copying what these guys were doing. Well, it didn't pan out. And Jeff's like, "Hey man, I got a little kid." I'm like, "I got a little kid." And they're like, "We got to find work." So I ended up working for what's today called Power Auto Media. Went back to my automotive roots, but they were entirely digital. And this was kind of really my first foray into digital. And they made me learn code, and I had to, we were on V-Bolton websites, and we redesigned all the websites. And I'm really mentally analog. So the learning curve for digital was not smooth. But I ended up launching 5 different magazine titles there. I would get them going, and then we'd find guys to fill in my shoes, and I would keep the other magazines going. The magazine titles, you can still see them online today. Well, there's a couple of them that closed, but Street Muscle Magazine, LSX Magazine, Vet Online, Rod Authority, which was a terrible name for hot rods and rat rods, but Rod Authority. I was not coming up with these names. These were not my names. What was the other? Chevy Hardcore, which I thought was like a terrible name. I'm like, you don't want hardcore involved with anything online. That's going to be a mess. But yeah, I think that's 5. And I was there for 2 years, and I was losing my mind. I was stressed beyond compare. And I had taken a major pay cut. We were living in a little condo in Temecula. I was miserable. And my wife has joked and said, like, if we were there another year, I don't think we'd be together. You were unpleasant to be around. So, plus the writing was on the wall that I was never, ever going to be able to afford a house in California. And not that things have gotten any better. And I didn't want to raise my kids in California, and I didn't really want my family there. And we did a lot of soul searching, a lot of prayer, a lot of conversations about it. And we decided that Tennessee should be the place for us to look for work. I had fallen in love with Knoxville. I really fell in love with Knoxville. I thought it was a cool town. It's right on the water. I'm like, I really like Knoxville. So I was looking for work at Knoxville. And I knew a guy out there who was making really bitching Hemi engines. And I was like, dude, I'll sweep your floor. Let me come work for you. And a guy named Dave Everhart. Dave was never able to pull the trigger. So that stalled out. But I got hired by a marketing company, and I went out there, and they said all the right words, and they offered me the right amount of money, and everything felt like it was falling into place. And we go out there, and it was a bad fit. Oh, it was a terrible fit. I wasn't a good fit there. It wasn't a good fit. But they came to me, and they said, hey, would you be interested in launching a magazine? You have all this magazine experience. You know, you came from Hot Rod Magazine. You came from Prime Media. You came, from Cycle News and Power Auto Media. Well, why aren't you doing a magazine? And I said, well, I actually own a domain name that's mine. It's called watercraftperformance.com. I bought it for like $11 on GoDaddy back in like 2009 or maybe 2010. And they're like, you want to do a jet ski magazine out of Tennessee? I said, I got it all dialed. I know everyone. I can do it. They said, great. And they ponied up the money, and we launched on the 1st of 2013. And we shot up like a rocket. It took us 3 months to blow way past Pro Riders subscription numbers. And we immediately got Yamaha. We immediately got Sea-Doo. Kawasaki was on board. They thought I was getting the band back together. It was like, hey, man, it's, the Beatles are reuniting. This is great. And so, and I brought in a couple guys from PWI. They were happy to be on board. We had like Ross Champion writing for us. We had all sorts of people. It was really, really cool. And then in June or July, the temperature changed. And the investors were like, you need to make more money. This needs to make more money. And I'm like, we're already covering our costs. We're covering my pay. We're covering the publisher's pay. We're breaking even right now. And like, it takes more than 6 months. It takes 2 to 3 years for a business a startup to make any profit. What are you talking about? You guys are crazy. And June or July, they start getting really like, they were sweating it. And August, they were like, this isn't working out. I'm going, what are you talking about? This isn't working out. This is absolutely working out. I'm like, look at our numbers. Look at every month we were signing new advertising. I think the magazine was making like $8,000 a month in ad revenue. And what was our cost overhead? All right. I mean, our cost was nothing. We weren't making, I don't think we were making more than like $1,800 or $1,200 profit. But again, it was a brand new business. Any one of you guys who started your own business, you know this. You're like, hey, man, within 7 or 8 months, you're covering your costs. That's not too bad. All right. We weren't doing too bad. September comes, and they said, you need to buy this off of us. And I was like, okay, well, I'll pay you what contracts we have. And they're like, what do you mean? I go, we're only as good as our next month. If everyone pulls their ad program, it makes no money. It's month to month. And they're like, absolutely not. You have to pay us for everything for the whole year. And I go, well, what do you have in it right now? And they're like, we have $55,000 into this magazine. And I'm like, I'm not giving you $55,000. It's not worth that. And they're like, how could you say it's not worth that? And I looked at them and I go, because I'm the magazine. And they're like, excuse me? I'm like, I'm the magazine. The very next day, they fired me. And not only did they fire me, but they called the cops on me. And I'm like, why? What the hell? Why are you calling the cops on me? And this is actually really funny. They pull me into the office and they say, we're letting you go. Active immediately. You need to clear out your desk and leave. And I go, what the hell are you talking about? And they're like, you're fired. And I'm like, this doesn't make any sense. We were negotiating for the price of the magazine yesterday. And they're like, well, you didn't buy it, so you're fired. And I'm like, you guys are effing idiots. And the lady jumped up and she freaked out and she started screaming and she threw open the door and she called 911 and she says, I have a belligerent ex-employee and we need a police car here. And the funny thing about it was that she put me on speakerphone. Now the husband of the owner, he was a co-owner, but the husband, he was kind of a real mellow dude, and I'll just say this: around 2:00, he went upstairs and he got high. He'd go up and he'd smoke weed. He was an old country musician, and he had stories with everybody. He's like, I got high with Willie Nelson. I got high with Johnny Cash. He got high with everybody. This guy got high. So anyway, Randy, he's a really cool guy. Sadly, he passed away from COVID, but Randy comes over and he goes, hey, brother, this was not how this was supposed to go. I'm really sorry. And I'm like, you guys are out of your mind. And I was using some 4-letter words, and I'll admit to that, because I am a stereotypical red-haired redhead with a temper. And I'm like, you guys are effing screwed. You know, this is the stupidest thing. I'm like, let me pay you like a credit card. I'm like, let me pay you. I'll sign a contract for a year and pay you guys your asking price, but you got to let me just take it and hold my feet to the fire on a contract. He's like, no. And meanwhile, I'm listening to this lady screaming into speakerphone so that I could hear that she's calling the cops. And the dispatcher, wonderful 911 operator, she goes, ma'am, calm down. What's the problem? And she says, we just fired an employee and he started swearing at us. And the woman and the operator goes, well, is he being violent? Is he causing damage? And she goes, no, but he's swearing at us. He's using vulgar language. And the operator goes, and he was just fired? And she goes, yes, and now he's swearing at me. And the operator goes, well, ma'am, they tend to do that when they get fired. And I start laughing. I'm packing up this box with like pictures of my wife and my kids and my little model cars and my Hemi piston that I have here on my desk, all the little doodads you have on your desk. And I start laughing at her. And I'm like, okay, bye, Holly. I'd like to say it was a pleasure, but it wasn't. And I walk out the door. Randy follows me to my truck. I'm like, all right. And I throw my box of junk in the truck. And Randy comes up to me and he goes, hey, brother, I'm really sorry, man. I this was not what we wanted to do. And I'm like, what is going on? You guys, this is the dumbest decision. I'm like, this thing is making money. It's covering its costs. And he puts his hand up and he says, well, we're into the IRS a lot of money. And I go, and you think me that I'm going to somehow generate the cash to bail you out of this? And he goes, well, we owe them like $20,000. I'm like, this is ridiculous. I'm like, dude, you can defer and do payments. That's how it works. He goes, well, that's the boss lady. And I'm like, all right, Randy, best of luck to you, buddy. And I jump in my truck and I call my wife and she goes, hey, what's going on? And it was like 10 in the morning. I go, well, they just fired me. And she goes, what? I go, I just got fired. Now, mind you, by around this time, my daughter is 3 years old. All she hears, all right, My wife's at the park with some other moms and all their kids are playing. And Heather starts to react. She's like, oh my gosh, oh, my husband got fired. Da, da, da. My daughter, 3-year-old daughter, doesn't understand what fired means. She thinks daddy's on fire. So she starts crying. And and my wife's like, no, daddy's not on fire. Which I'm like, okay, well, that diffused the situation. I'm not so hyped up anymore because I'm like, my poor little girl thinking that I caught on fire. So I come home, she comes home, and she's like, well, what are we going to do? I said, I don't know. I think I need to step away from the situation. I think I just need to step away. Now, here's where it gets funny. I think they fired me on a Friday. No, they fired me on a Thursday. I'll tell you why I know this. They fired me on a Thursday, and then Friday morning, these NASA rocket scientists put out an email to every single one of my contributors. Well, guess what? Some of the contributors also worked for Sea-Doo, Yamaha, and Cowie, as well as some other advertisers. They sent an email out to all the contributors. Said, sorry, Kevin's no longer with the magazine. We fired him. They send that out. And apparently they had no idea that social media existed. Because about a half an hour later, they rewrite that same letter saying, we've decided to go in a new direction, and we have this person instead going to be running now as the editor of the magazine. Well, you have Tim McKercher from Sea-Doo, who's been on this podcast. Tim McKercher had written a couple articles for me, so he was on my list of contributors. He's also the media rep for Sea-Doo. So he gets an email saying, we shit-canned Kevin, he's gone. And then a half an hour later saying, oh, we've decided to go in a different direction. And he's like, okay. Friday, Saturday, my phone melts. My phone is boiling. Everyone's calling me going, what the hell, dude? And I go, they're crazy. This is what happened. I tell them this exact same story. And they start laughing. They're like, well, I give them a week. And they're like, what are you going to do? And Yamaha, Cowie, and Sea-Doo all said, let me know what your plan is. I said, okay. And I got real nervous because I'm like, I don't know what to do. They had tried to like tether me to like a non-compete, which was a joke. But at the time I was scared. I was freaked out. I'm like, I don't want to get sued. I don't want any legal problems. I don't want to get sued. Well, I was really on the fence about starting up again. I still owned watercraftperformance.com. I owned it. It was in my name. They never changed the domain name over. So I thought, okay, I'm just going to turn it off. But then I'm like, oh, I don't want to get sued and blah, blah, blah. And then they started sending me emails going, don't you dare touch the domain name or we're going to sue you, which was totally extra legal. It was BS. And a good friend of mine who it's Nashville. Everyone's in a band. A good friend of mine named Brad. Brad was in a band, and I'm bitching and moaning and crying in my beer, and he goes, Kevin, there's a grant here in Nashville that gives free legal representation to artists in Nashville. I go, I'm not an artist. He goes, you're a journalist. I'm like, I write a jet ski magazine. He goes, check it out. Go for it. So I send in an application. I get approved, and they say, hey, listen, your appointment is for Saturday morning at 9 a.m. on October 20th. I can't believe I remember this. Okay. And that was scheduled out. Well, at 11:30 p.m. on October 18th, my second daughter was born, which was almost exactly, except for like 12 hours, a month and 12 hours from when I got fired. My wife was 8 months pregnant and change when I was fired. So my daughter's born. I stay the night at the hospital with my wife and daughter. And probably around noon of Friday the 19th, my wife goes, "Hey, listen, go home, take a shower." We had our sister-in-law taking care of my oldest at the time. And she was like, "Just take care, take her out to eat, spend the night, whatever." I said, "Okay." And she said, I think we had my sister-in-law coming back for Saturday, but she goes, "You need to go to that meeting with the lawyer on Saturday morning." I said, "Okay." So Friday I go home. Everyone's fine. Everyone's great. Delivery went well. Baby's healthy. Take my daughter out to like Chick-fil-A or something like that. And the next morning, I think I dropped off my oldest at my friend Brad's house because they have a daughter the same age and they play well together. And I dropped her off and I drove off downtown Nashville to go meet with the lawyer. Now, here's the thing. Here's how I operate. This is my brain. I'm like, this makes or breaks my business. This makes or breaks my career. So I'm not going to waste this lawyer's time. So I put on my black suit, white shirt, tie. I have like a satchel, and I've printed out every communication. I've printed out the non-compete. I've printed out everything, and I have it all marked off, and I have it in manila folders and all this crap. I have it all dialed because I don't want to waste this guy's time. I show up like 25 minutes early because I'm always early because I'm insane like that. I'm always early. If you show up at the time, you're late. You need to be early. So that's just me. I show up and the people putting it on are like, "Oh, you're here. Well, we're not really ready for the lawyers yet." I go, "I'm not a lawyer. I'm one of the artists." Now, mind you, I'm looking at dudes in like torn jeans and flip flops and country, shrimp skin boots and cowboy hats, and I show up in a suit. So they're all looking at me and what's with this guy? And I'm waiting my turn, and I watch these lawyers come in. All right, and I'm looking out the window, looking at cars. And I see this Maserati Quattroporte come in, which is Italian for four-door. It's a four-door Maserati, and it's called a Quattroporte. So anyway, I look at this Maserati, and I go, "I want." And he's a little silver-haired guy, and he's in a suit, but he doesn't have a tie on, so he's just got his collar open. And I'm like, "I want that guy. I want that guy." Well, they don't. That's not how they operate. And I think I've shared this story on this channel before, but I'm doing this one anyway because what the hell? It's a fun story. So the little silver-haired guy comes in. I'm like, "I want this dude." And I even go to the girl who's assigning people, and I go, "Can I have him?" And she goes, "Well, it's whoever's open next." And I'm like, "Oh, come on." And I'm watching. I'm like, "Okay, it looks like he's wrapping up." And all of a sudden they go, "Number whatever." I don't remember what my number was. And they're like, number 8, you got to go to table 5 or whatever it was. And I was like, ugh. So I go over, and this guy that I see, square jaw, slicked back, thick black hair. I mean, just big old mass of black hair, slicked back. Total New Jersey boy, right? Yoked. He's got shoulders on him. He's in a skin-tight pink polo shirt and khaki pants and like leather, like woven leather shoes. It's really funny. And I'm like, "Oh my gosh, I got Jersey Shore. I'm screwed." This guy's like, "Hey, how you doing?" And I'm like, how's you doing? And I'm like, "I'm all right. How are you?" He's like, "I'm doing okay." He's real New York. He's real Italian, And I'm like, "All right, here we go." And he goes, "All right, what's going on?" So I tell him the whole story. And he's like, okay, jet ski website, jet skis, whatever. And he goes, let me see the non-compete. And I'm like, okay. And I show him the printout of the non-compete. And he goes, this thing's bullshit. And I was like, okay. And he goes, Kevin, you brought everything to the table. You're the magazine. You can do whatever you want. And he goes, and you own the domain name? And I go, yeah. And he goes, start your magazine tomorrow. And I was like, oh. And he's just like, he goes, I'd ignore him. He goes, it's all hot air. Don't worry about it. And I was like, he was very dismissive. He was just like, you're good. You don't waste my time. You're good. And I was like, all right, well, do you want anything? He goes, no. I go, do you want any of this paperwork? He goes, no, I don't need it. Just ignore him. Go about your business. And I was like, okay. Because I really wanted something more definitive. And I was I kind of got what I wanted, but it was kind of a bummer. So I said, well, thank you very much for your time, Mr. And I won't give him the name out because he was our lawyer for several years, and now we have a new lawyer. But I said, thank you very much. And I reached out my hand to shake his hand, and he grabs my hand and he pulls the sleeve of my suit jacket up. And he holds up my wrist and he goes, were you in the hospital? And I go, yeah. And he goes, when? And I said, yesterday. And he goes, why were you in the hospital? And I said, and he got hot real fast. He got real heated. And I was like, well, my wife delivered our daughter. And he looks at me and he goes, you just had a baby? And I go, yeah. I go, she's our second. And he goes, how old's your first daughter? I go, I think she was 4. And he goes, you had a 4-year-old little girl and your wife was pregnant and they fired you. And then they make threatening emails to you and they threatened to ruin your career. Because I had printed out all these emails that they had threatened me and they'd made all these, they said, we'll destroy your career. No one will ever work with you again. You'll never work in this town again. And I said, yes, sir. And he took these big old Italian hands and he slammed them on the table. I'm just like, boom. And it everyone stopped talking. It was a record scratch. He goes, wham! He goes, are you telling me? And he goes full Martin Scorsese. He is F-bombing. At full volume. You guys think I'm loud and hot-tempered? This dude made me look like a kitty cat. This dude absolutely, he goes, they effing fired you, fully effing knowing you were having a baby, fully knowing they're in the wrong. Are you kidding me? Are you fucking mad? And I'm like, oh, and I sat back down and I was like, yes, sir. And he's howling. Nobody's talking at this time. They are watching. They're thinking, what the hell did this redhead say to this guy to piss him off? And he goes, you give me that. He goes, open up your bag. Give me all that stuff. And I go, oh, and I opened up the satchel and I pulled out the whole manila folder this thick. And he goes, you give me all that shit. He goes, I'm going to sew the pants off of them. He goes, I'll fucking take their dog. I'm going to take their house. I'm going to take the fillings out of their mouths. I'm going to, and he starts just screaming. He is howling. And he goes, and then he stops and he looks at me and goes, Kevin? I go, yes, sir. And he goes, you don't worry about nothing. You don't worry about nothing. You hear me? You don't worry about nothing. I have you. I got you, brother. I got you. And I'm like, okay. And he says, here's what you're going to do. He goes, you're going to get in your car. He goes, you're going to call your wife. You're going to tell her that I got your back and that you don't worry about nothing. He goes, you drive your ass to that hospital right now. He goes, you hug your baby. You kiss your wife. You tell him, and I'm starting my business on Monday. You hear me? And I'm like, yes, sir. And he goes, get the fuck out of here right now. He goes, I'll email you next week. And I'm like, thank you. And he goes, have a great day. Give my best to your wife and daughter. And I'll, okay. I get in the truck and I have tears running down my face. I'm calling my wife and she goes, what happened? And I'm like, I think I hired a personal assassin. I don't know what happened, but this is the most amazing thing I've ever heard in my life. turns out the guy was an absolute shark, like high level shark out of New Jersey, and moved down to Nashville to get out of the high tension scene that was going on in New York. And now all he did was like music contract law. I picked the biggest, deepest scab on this dude. I got an apology letter. And I honestly, I got an email. It was the most like, we're very sorry. This was very unbecoming of us. You go right ahead, do whatever you want, blah, blah, blah. And sure enough, November 1st, pulled the trigger. Magazine went live. And it went live underneath the Watercraft Journal. And what's funny is that I give credit to my friend Mark Samuix, who still to this day owns jetangler.com. He says, well, you got to think of something a little bit more kind of fun, a little bit more kitschy. And he's like, you got to do like the Jet Ski Times, or he's thinking about like newspaper titles. And I'm like, what, like the Wall Street Journal? He goes, yeah, do the Watercraft Journal. And so it was kind of his idea, to kind of get the newspaper thing in. And so we launched the Watercraft Journal on November 1st. So that's how we came about. So that's the whole story with that. And that took me 40 minutes to talk. Anyway, so I don't really know what the plan is with the magazine. And the plan with the magazine is we were primarily written content. And people read the magazine. And we were getting 500,000 readers every year. And the problem was that I always knew video would have to be supplemental. I always knew video was going to be... I owned the domain. I literally just... I still own the domain to this day. So I bought watercraftjournal.com. And then I just forwarded because all you do is call GoDaddy and you go, hey, listen, I want this to now route to this website and this web address. And they go, and GoDaddy said, okay. And because I owned it, I went in and I said, hey, listen, anything that is at watercraftjournal.com or at watercraftperformance.com, anyone who logs into watercraftperformance.com immediately gets thrown to Watercraft Journal. And right out of the gate, we had several thousand readers right out of the gate. They're like, oh, this is different. I'm like, yeah, it's different. Anyway, sucks too, because Watercraft Journal was a really good website. It flowed very easy. But we had to simplify because the layout that we have is incredibly simple because it has to be mobile optimized. 73% of our readership are on phones. 73% or 71%. 71 or 73? 70, whatever. 71. 70-something percent is using their phones. And you got to figure, it's like I put the magazine is in every single person's pocket. If you got a smartphone or you're at a computer, you have the magazine and it's free. So there you go. So the funny thing about it was that like around 2000, I want to say 2016, 15, 16, I got hit to the fact I'm like, we're going to have to really start doing video. And then 2017, I think, was the first year that Sea-Doo came in and said, hey, we'd like to be a sponsor for the video as well. So we had a newsletter, we had sponsorship on the magazine, and then we had video. And Yamaha was the Yamaha kind of owned the newsletter, and Sea-Doo was title sponsor on the website, and then they became channel sponsor for YouTube channel. But they didn't want to own the podcast, which I thought was funny. But the podcast hadn't happened yet. Podcast didn't show up until like 2020? I think maybe 2019. I think I've been doing this for about 4 years. I can't remember. But video creation and video content just started taking more and more of my time and more resources, but it was way more received, and it was driving some readership, but really not like I hoped. And the reality is that most people don't want to read. They want to be shown. Just tell me. Just tell me what it does. I don't want to read anything. So, I mean, as you guys can imagine, I'm pretty long-winded. And I write very thorough, detailed articles. People wanted it in an 8-minute video or a 10-minute video or a 15-minute video. And they just would rather be on the YouTube channel than actually reading it. And so we've watched readership decline as viewership's gone up. So the scales have equalized, but it's in a direction that I'm kind of like, ugh. You know, do I pay $1,200 for World Finals coverage when 600 people read that article? Or do I go in my backyard and do a 5-minute video on a gas can, and get 20,000 views? And it's like, oh my gosh, this sucks, because I want to do World Finals coverage. I want to cover racing. I want to cover that stuff. Here's a good example. And this is me grappling or battling with where audience change has gone. I personally felt that the hour and 50 minutes that I was blessed to do with Dustin Farthing was some of the most entertaining, most enjoyable interview that I've done on this channel. To have full access to Dustin Farthing, and for him to sit there in his house and be like, ask me anything you want. I'm like, oh, okay. And we talked about some of the coolest stuff and greatest innovations in racing and performance and parts development and history of this sport. And guess what? Hasn't even broken 1,000 views. It hasn't. I can't believe it. It blows my mind that it doesn't have 1,000 views. But then when I have Greg on here and he and I bullshit for an hour about the naturally aspirated 1.9 liter, it gets 7,000 or 8,000 views. And Greg and I are sitting there just like, Durr. I mean, it was a joke. We were laughing at it. He's like, oh, okay, let me share about what I did with Yamaha. Okay. And we just goofed off. It was just two friends laughing about jet skis. And that gets 8,000 views. And one of the winningest, most superior athletes in our sport, nobody wants to watch. And you know what that means to me? Thankfully, I didn't lose any money on this, because I would have. That would mean stop doing interviews with racers, stop doing interviews with the most talented people in our industry, the most innovating people in our industry, because my audience of tire kickers and tourists don't want to watch it. But thankfully, I'm still gonna, because I don't care. I think it's fantastic. And I'm going to go down to Dustin's place. I'm going to ride his insane GP carbon fiber boat. And I want him back on. I'll put his son back on. All right. Even if it's solely just to pump up Devin's career, I don't care. Devin, get on here. I'll do it. Let's talk about it. People are like, I don't know who this kid is, and they're not talking about the Sea-Doo Explorer Pro, so I'm not going to watch. Whatever. I don't care. We're still going to do it. All right. I'm not out any money. All right. I'm doing this because I want to. All right. If I don't know, if I was losing money, I'd still do it. No, I don't think I would. I think I'd probably pull the plug. I think I'd probably pull the plug if I didn't enjoy conversations like this. Anderson, fantastic interview. Every time Greg gets on, it's fun. Talking with Dustin or Chris McCluggage or Craig Warner, dude. There's people I'd love to get on here. Dude, if I could get like Victor Sheldon on here, if I could get Larry Rippenkroger on here, oh my gosh. If I could get some of these guys who are legends, who haven't been on a ski in decades, but just tell me stories. Just tell me stories. That's what I would want to do. That's what Kevin Shaw wants to do. Is I want to sit there and get Clay Cullen and all these legends of the sport and just go, dude, just tell me stories. Just entertain me. That's what I would want personally. But anyway. And then it'll probably get 500 views. It'll be totally disappointing because people are like, I want to talk about the smart tricks. Why are you talking about stand-ups? I've never been on a stand-up in my life. Anyways, but I don't know. So, yeah, I'm kind of at the point that the interviews, it's either going to be me just sitting here running my mouth for an hour, which I've done effectively today, or it's going to be me interviewing people that I'm interested in. All right. I'm not going to interview JP. I'm not going to have Randy Cabrera on here. What are they going to talk about? They're going to talk about their own channels. They're going to talk about them. All right. Now, don't get me wrong. I want Ernesto, or I'd like to put Ernesto on this one. I think Ernesto would be fun because I think Ernesto is a fireball. And Ernesto was in last week's, and I need to email him. Just be like, dude, you want to be on next week? I'm like, just talk about whatever the hell you want to talk about. Just go right ahead. I'll just wind you up and let you go. But anyway, yeah, what oil should I use? Well, you know what you heard last week? 1,000 horsepower compound turbo Yamaha runs Valvoline VR1 2050. And I'm like, that's what I run in my Charger. It's what I run in my truck. It's what I run in all my engines. It's what I run in my dyno engine that I just made 630 horse on. I love it. I love it. And it's like, what oil should I run? It's like, David, he pays me $2 to give a Viper story. You guys want to hear my stupid Viper story from when I was in college? I'll end with that. If you want. That was my question, Kevin. I honestly didn't know. Well, what kind of oil do you run in something that makes that kind of power? You run freaking VR1, the same garbage I run in all my hot stuff. 2050, yes, VR1. VR1. Valvoline VR1. All right. Well, David wants me to retell the Viper story. I'm going to give a really abbreviated version. I didn't know what I wanted to do when I grew up. I had no clue. So I was just working at a Dodge dealership. I liked old cars. I had a Dodge Charger. I had a 69 Coronet at the time. I was working on a bunch of different cars. So I said, I'm going to go work at a Dodge dealership. So I started working at Huntington Beach Dodge. And this is before it became Chrysler, Dodge, Jeep, blah, 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 blah. All right. There was Huntington Beach Dodge, and there was Huntington Beach Chrysler. They were separate. And, David, I wasn't there for Mudbug. Mudbug stories, Viper. Okay. All right. So, there was a uniform that we had. All right. And it was a white work shirt with the Pentastar, with the red Pentastar. And it said Huntington Beach Dodge on it. And we had blue Dickies pants, and I always wore black steel-toed boots. But for whatever reason, not my direct boss in the parts department, but the general manager was totally cool with me choosing my own uniform. And I went through the parts department and I bought 3 really nice knit black polo shirts that right on the chest was the original 68 through 70 Hemi logo. Just said it was a wide text, and in silver stitching said Hemi right here. And on the shoulder was the Mopar Performance logo from the 70s and 80s. So I wore that polo shirt and I tucked it into I always tucked my polo shirt in, I always tucked my shirt in to a pair of black Dickies that I ironed. All right. My work pants were never ironed, and I don't know. I just wanted to look dandy. So I would iron my black Dickies and my black polo shirt and have my 21 lace Doc Martens. And they weren't Docs, they were steel-toed boots. They were work boots. And I got them at like Payless Shoes. So I don't even remember what the brand was. But I would show up all decked out in black with the word Hemi written across my chest. And the parts manager would get pissed off because he's like, you're not representing Huntington Beach Dodge. But GM loved it. In fact, the head of the sales department called me Hemi. He goes, hey, it's Hemi. Just because, it looked like a name tag said Hemi, so they call me Hemi. Well, the owner of Huntington Beach Dodge, I want to say his last name was Nicholas, but that might be wrong. He had a real pretty daughter who was, I think she was a teenager, but maybe she was 18. A real pretty girl, but I was like 22, 23. And the owner had a couple cool cars, and they parked in the back service bays, and they were garaged. He had garage doors over them, and the bays were hardly ever open. And then he sold one of the cars because he had a couple cool cars, but he sold a few to get 2 cars, and these were his pride and joy. He had a plum crazy purple. He had a plum crazy purple 1970 Dodge Challenger TA, which was a Trans Am, and it was a 340 6-pack. What that meant was it was a 340 small block, all right, with 3 2-barrel carburetors. And on the side, it said 340 6-pack. And seat handle strap. Chad, go to revaracing.com and go to the OEM or factory replacement parts. They sell all the factory replacement parts for every ski you can think of. Okay. So this guy, he owned a plum crazy purple 340 6-pack Challenger, vinyl top, black, Organisol black hood, but it was an automatic. It wasn't a stick shift. So it had the slap, the T-handle slap shifter. But then parked above it, because the Challenger would leak oil, and he wasn't going to have it leaking oil on the other car, was a Hennessy 900. I don't know if any of you guys know what a Hennessy 900 is, but a Hennessy 900 was a Dodge Viper that John Hennessy out of Texas would turbocharge and made 900 horsepower. And it had a redesigned chin spoiler and a big wing, and it was black with twin silver stripes. And he never drove that car, ever. I mean, I heard that car fire up maybe once or twice. Yes, it was a 727 torque flight. I was talking about the shifter. There was a name for the shifter. And sorry, but thank you, Kevin. Anyways, so I got friendly with some of the technicians, and one of them was the guy who got paid a few extra bucks to fire up the boss's cars and move them around, move the oil around, make sure the fluids get hot, and then park them. And they were always teasing me, going, "Hey, you want to drive that Challenger? Oh, I know Kevin wants that Challenger." Now, here's the thing. My 69 Charger at the time, because I bought it on my 22nd birthday, I drove my 69 Charger to work once. It had no back glass. It had no side glass. It had no paint on it. It was Rust-Oleum red primer. It had no grill. It had no back. It had no bumpers on it. It had no hood, because I had taken the hood off, and I sold the hood because I was making my own fiberglass hood, which I ended up getting rid of. And I was as Joe Dirt as it got. Okay. It had ProTrack skinnies in the front, and it had big dry rotted Hoosiers in the back. And it was sitting up real high like a super stock car. I had gotten the 383 running pretty hot. My brother and I had spent some time on it. And we did a full rebuild of the torque flight, using a couple of cool tricks. But it was still a peg leg, 8 3/4 rear. We hadn't changed the rear gear. We hadn't changed the carrier. So it was a dog. All right. It was just and I had like a Hurst quarter stick shifter in it. And no carpet, no interior, bucket seats, bench was in it, but the bucket seats were covered with 2 In-N-Out Burger t-shirts. Those were my seat covers. So I had driven that car to work one day, and everyone came out. They're like, "Hey, it's Hemi's car." I mean, I was Joe Dirt. Don't get me wrong. This car was Joe Dirt. It was bad. And I came out, and I mean, I had insulation from the seats on my polo shirt and stuff. But I had driven the car, and I drove the car to college a couple times and stuff, and it totally wasn't street legal. But I had 2.5-inch exhaust out of it, and it had a good burble to it, and it sounded good. But no bumpers, no grill, blah blah blah. But the turn signals, headlights, and brake lights worked. And I had no my gauge cluster. Nothing worked in the gauge cluster. I think the tack and the oil pressure worked. I think that was about it. So anyway, I pull in, and everyone's like, "Hey, Kevin's here, Hemi's here with this Charger." And so I didn't even get to clock in. I clocked in late, and I'm like, I'm gonna get in trouble anyway. I remember that. I remember where I parked too. It's kind of funny. But so everyone teases me, going, "Oh, I bet you want to drive that purple Challenger." I'm like, "Nah, it's a small block." They're like, "What? It's a 346 pack." I'm like, "They weren't fast." "Oh yeah, they were." "Oh yeah." I'm like, "Not stock. Not stock. They weren't. They were dogs. The Hemi cars were dogs." Every guy who says I had a 327 small block Corvette and I walked away on a 426 Hemi Roadrunner, I believe them. A 426 Hemi stock was 812 pounds. It was a boat anchor. All right. The Queen Mary has a lighter anchor than that engine. It was a dog. Those engines were dogs. They needed a camshaft, and they needed to be shifted. You had to shift a Hemi at 6,400 RPM minimum for it to have any sort of benefit over a standard V8. Anyway, so the boss came out, and it was on a Saturday, and I was working Saturday shift, which I normally didn't, but whatever. And he comes out, and he goes, "Hey, everyone's telling me I got to go see your Charger." And I was like, "Oh, it's really a dog." He goes, "No. So I walk around the car. And he goes, "Oh, you see my Challenger?" I go, "Yes, sir." And he goes, "Oh, yeah, I bet you want to drive it." And I said, "No, to be honest, I'm like, there's a neat car. Don't get me wrong. I'm not poo-pooing the car, but that car is no faster than my Charger." I said, "Guaranteed." I'm like, I got head work, I got intake, I got headers, I have a camshaft in it, I got a big 750 Holly on it. I'm like, "Dude, I'll wipe the floor with you." "Oh yeah?" And I go, "Not you personally, but the car." I'm trying to be respectful about it, but I was like, "Yeah, dude, car's a toad." And I'm like, "I could walk away on it." I'm like, "Don't get me wrong, this car is going to run high 14s. It's a peg leg with no rear gear." It had like 323 gear. It was a dog. But he goes, "Well, what do you think about that Viper?" I said, "I don't know. I've never driven a Viper." He's like, You never driven it?" I said, No. And he goes, "You wanna?" I said, "What, your car?" And he goes, "Yeah." I go, "Dude, that's a 900 horsepower turbo Hennessy." He goes, "Well, if you stay out of the turbo, you'll be fine." And I'm like, if you want to let me drive your car, I will drive your car." He goes, "All right, let's get it." So they pull the Challenger out, they lower the lift, they let the Hennessy out. He gets it all warm, and he goes, "All right, hotshot." He goes, "Let's see how hot you are." And I'm like, "Excuse me?" And he goes, "Yeah, I think you can't even drive this car." And I'm like, "Oh, I'm pretty sure I can drive this car." And he goes, "Oh, whatever." So he doesn't even get in the passenger seat. He just walks up. We had a real long row, or like a 2-lane road that went through the middle of the dealership. It was a big open air dealership. And he walked up to the showroom where all the sales guys were outside smoking. And he goes, "Hey, Hemi's going to take out the Viper." And they're like, "That dude's 23 years old. Are you out of your mind?" And they're like, No. He'll be fine." So I get out. He's like, "I think he's scared of it." That's what one of the guys told me later. He's like, "Oh, yeah, he thought you were scared of it." I'm like, "Oh, all right." So I pull this thing up, and it's chopping. I'm like, "All right." And I pull through the dealership, and I'm thinking this thing has got a snow shovel grill on the front. I mean, air dam on the front of it. So I pull out, and I just onto Beach Boulevard. And you guys who know Orange County, you know Beach Boulevard and Huntington Beach. I pull out as crooked, ease that thing out onto Beach Boulevard, and it's wide open all the way down to Warner. I mean, it's open. And I go, "Okay," and I pull the car out, and I had it loaded up, and I absolutely went, and I spooled it up, and I dumped the clutch and put it right in a second. And that car went completely sideways, and I pinned the wheels out, and I roll it into third, and it completely pitches me the other way. I can't keep that tail straight. Left, right, left. I get it through fourth gear, somewhat straight. I mean, I'm probably at like a 30-degree angle. Roll out of it. By the time I roll out of it, I see the speedo at 85, tickling 90. By the time I get to Warner, I'm like, "Fuck!" I get around, I turn right on Warner, and I drop it down to 30 miles an hour. I'm like, "Whoa!" It did scare the piss out of me. It scared me to death. And I come up, I turn right on Gothard, and I go north of Gothard, and I turn right, and I can't remember what the street name was. I want to think it's New Hope, but I might be way wrong. But I turn right, and I'm coming up on Beach, and I'm like, I got to put on a show. So I go, whoop, and I spool it up again. I'm in second, and I come around, and as soon as I get back on Beach, I wail on it and goes, "Ah!" I'm just completely spooled up, just "Ah!" And then fourth gear, "Ah!" And then I come out of it as I pull up onto the dealership and just pull right up, and I park it right in front of the showroom, and I let it idle down, and I kill the engine, and I swing open, and I had the door open by this time. And I kill the engine. He comes right up to me and he goes, "You're done." And I'm like, "I'm not fired, am I?" He goes, "Nope, but you're never getting in my car again." I go, "Yes, sir." And I got out, and I walked out, and there was like 4 or 5 sales guys, and their eyes are like, "You got balls, kid. You got balls to do that to the boss's car." And I was like, "He said, get on it." And no one knew that I babied it around Gothard. I was like, "Oh my gosh." But I got on it again, just a little bit at the end, just to smoke them. And, it's probably $1,400 in tires. That's my Viper story. But I did not get fired. And later, one of the guys came up to me and he goes, "Yeah, he thought you were chicken shit." I'm like, to be honest, I turned pale when I got around the corner. I got real scared. Anyway, that's my Viper story. Guys, I didn't see any other super chats, so that's me just running my mouth for an hour and 14 minutes. Hope this one was entertaining. If not, we'll have a guest on next week. I'll reach out to Ernesto and see if he wants to do it. Otherwise, we might have someone else. All right, guys, have a good night. Thanks again for tuning in. Thanks for enjoying our little quasi 10-year celebration. And we'll talk to you soon.